right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. You are listening to the Inside Method podcast, and today we are continuing our series with human development and what that looks like here at Method. In case you are new to this series, what we're trying to do here is talk through how we specifically as a company approach some of the topics that go into developing our people and honing their skills and interpersonal skills between one another and our clients. And John Tuders is with us again here, and he is heading up this initiative. And so, John, we're glad to have you. And we're also sitting down with Dr. Alex Jacobs. And so, John, I'll let you go ahead and give a little bit of background introducing Alex, and then we'll jump in. So tell us what we're talking about and give us a little bit, introduce Alex for us.
Perfect. I appreciate it, Josh. Yeah, I'm excited. This is, I've been looking forward to this day. We're going to be hitting on knowing yourself. And in this case today, we're going to be talking about your personal brand, which is extremely important. And I couldn't be happier with our guest today. This is a gentleman I've known out of Chicago, Dr. Alex Jacobs, who I now have known 2 years and have still never met him in person, right? The wonderful world of remote world. But we've worked together. We've done research together. We've done a lot of writing, and this space here particularly I'm excited about. So before we dig in and start rolling, Dr. Alex Jacobs, Alex, friend, colleague, welcome. Pumped that you're with us, and really excited to dig into the topic. And Alex, a lot of the work that Alex has done, you're talking 8+ years in this space of leadership development and coaching. And it's a space that he has as much passion as I am. And I don't know if anybody would ever hit that limit for me and meet my match, but there he is. So Alex, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. So Alex, take it, give a little bit of backdrop of this space, why we're digging in here, and the path and journey we're going to take everybody today.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, John, thank you guys for having me. This is such a treat to be here. I know that John and I have talked about this a lot actually over the last few months, and I feel very honored to be able to be in your space and be talking to you guys about this. And yeah, John and I, our relationship is born out of the pandemic, one for modern times, but I know that we have had our own, I think, intimate conversations around what it takes to build a personal brand, or what it actually kind of means to build a personal brand, I should say. So I'll run through myself a little bit, and then I can just sort of spew out my completely uneducated thoughts, and we can go from there. Yeah, I've been doing. This is the stuff that I think really matters to me. I served as a brand strategist. I was in the design world for a long time. I was in academia before that. I've also run magazines and been in the journalism world. And right now, I'm a consultant in the tech space. But I focus a lot on culture work, where we work a lot with a lot of the senior leaders that we're working with. And these questions of personal brand or how to build yourself, especially in an organization, especially in kind of the modern organization where so much of what we do is remote, virtual, mediated, comes up quite a lot, and these are demands that a lot of organizations are making now on people, right? For better or for worse, I think we're all told that our career is ours to make and ours to own. It's up to us to sell ourselves internally. Many organizations look for and aspire to have a kind of entrepreneurial mindset in the talent that they bring in, and especially the leaders that they hire, which I think are really wonderful things, but it also is a totally different kind of skill set to have, and one that a lot of people aren't necessarily trained in. So I'll talk a little bit about how I conceive of personal branding. Okay, let's talk about a brand. So my definition of a brand is pretty simple. I actually think the best way to define a brand is that old adage. I don't know who this comes from, but what do they say? A brand is what someone says about you behind your back.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not what you say about yourself, it's what others say about you.
Yeah.
which is to say a brand is your reputation, and not just your reputation. A brand is kind of your essential reputation, that which exceeds you, that's that which is kind of outside of your control.
Right.
It is how you're perceived, and rightfully or wrongfully, it's how you're perceived, right? When you're thinking about like branding a product or branding an organization, I think the things that make up a good brand are a lot of the same kinds of foundations that make up a good personal brand. And for me, it kind of comes down to sort of four things for a brand, and we'll talk about that what that means for a personal brand. Like, I think a good brand knows and names its audience, right? Kind of understands who it's for, and is directed towards that. Good brands usually offer transformation, not just satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to take someone from one place to another, turn someone from one thing to another, an arc, right? A story that someone can be a part of a narrative. The third thing is, I think good brands, and this is a thing we're going to come back to, communicate authentically.
Right.
That particular focus has been exacerbated significantly with the advent of social media, I think, because you're starting to see, especially younger generations who don't want to feel sold to,
right,
versus they want to feel as though they're being spoken to as a smart, person who can make decisions for themselves, and you're just helping inform them as one of the options, versus I think you go back like 30 years ago, and it was who had the sleekest ads, who had the most polish, who was, and that's a relatively recent development, I think. And so I don't know that we want to get into that right now, but I just wanted to call that out because that's something I've actually been wrestling with a lot with some of how we approach some of the conversations we're having in the digital space.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that up, and I think that's a great place to even start, right? Like, I think what you're calling out is the fact that consumers, clients, customers are much savvier and better informed and well educated than I think a lot of people perceive them to be. There's a lot of cynicism, of course, in marketing and advertising around target audiences and market segments and the reduction of people to a bunch of numbers that can be manipulated. But I think the carryover to that towards personal brand is a lot of it is the same way. Back when I was an educator, I don't know, probably the best piece of advice I ever received was when you think about walking into a classroom and, approaching a group of very smart, precocious undergrads, the one mistake, the really fatal mistake you can make is not being yourself.
Right.
You have to be yourself because they will see through you immediately, regardless of, how perfect the facade is that you bring in. And I think in a workplace, it is completely the same way.
I couldn't agree more.
We've all seen that, right? We've seen leaders who think that they need to aspire to be the hard ass or the disciplinarian when it's not in their nature, or vice versa. We've seen leaders who are really, can be insecure, or neurotic, and try to play themselves off as the cool, laid back California surfer dude, and it just never works. Everyone sees completely through it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Alex. Teaching and the classroom or in the boardroom, you're right. It's the same thing. The level of clarity that people can see is beyond what you actually think. Right, that authentic self and purpose, and that's a big part of what Method preaches, to bring your whole self to work, and with that comes your confidence. If you're acting, whether it's to your client or within the team or whatever, something that you think you're supposed to be playing business, right, or something like that, people see through that, and your confidence wanes.
Oh yeah.
Your confidence comes with your authentic brand and who you are. And, when you get with a company like where we are now, where, that differentiation and the diversification of who people are is accepted, that's a very healthy environment to be in. We always want folks to bring that to the client too. Don't be who you're not. It's a great point. I see it constantly, and I applaud it.
Well, and if we've done our job right from a recruiting perspective, you're here because of who you are.
Right.
Yeah. And lean into that.
Yeah.
And Alex, so apologies. I know you were on point 3 of 4 as far as what makes a solid. What are the important factors within a brand? I cut you off at 3, so my apologies there. But can you share what was the last point you were getting to?
The last one was very simple. Thanks for keeping me on track. Last one is very simple. It's a good brand makes and keeps its promises.
That's a good call.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the question of knowing your audience, speaking authentically. What were the other 2? Knowing your audience, speaking authentically, offering transformation, and then keeping your promises. So when you think about like what that means in a personal brand space, a lot of those things are the same thing. So what I would say is, in terms of a good brand knowing and naming its audience, for a personal brand, when we're thinking about what translating those skills, it's really, I think, just about knowing and naming yourself, right?
Yeah.
This goes back to this question of authenticity, like really kind of understanding who you are, what are your abilities as opposed to your skills, what are your kind of natural orientations, all of the things that make you the core kernel of self, as opposed to just employee number 7609. And then I think that the question of transformation, I think good personal brands have some kind of transformative vision. We're not expecting anybody to be a guru and sit down and transform everyone around them. But I think people that have strong personal brands at least are able to offer a sense of a kind of future-oriented sense of the kind of impact that they will have on the people around them. And then I think the last thing is again, it just has to do with authenticity, right? Good personal brands communicate authentically and with a sense of purpose. And then, keeping your promises. I mean, first and foremost, we talked about reputation. If you want people to trust you and believe in you, you have to step up and deliver.
Yeah, and one of the things, Alex, we talk heavily about here, whether it's onboarding or ongoing, is trust, building trust, and building that, continually building on that relational intelligence, and building trust with client, building trust with your team here. And to me, the front door of that is knowing who you are and being true to yourself, right? People will trust you if they fully feel that the authentic person walked in the room. And that's the tie-in, right? That's, for us, that's one of the biggest tie-in. That's how we get employees, and that's how we keep employees. That's how we get clients. That's how we keep clients.
To me, it would seem like the motivation behind that, when you're saying people trust you when they see the authentic self walk in, it's mostly because they just know what they're working with. We've all probably got horror stories, or have at the very least heard them, of you're out for your own best interests, right. And if they're not mine, then are you just playing a role?
That's right.
To until I'm not useful anymore. Right. But if I know, if you've shown me your authentic self, if I can see that in action, and I'm not worried about who is this person really? Yeah. It goes a long way.
It does. And, and I think, Alex, one of the big things is a lot of the stuff we've talked about is the importance of it, right? Why it's important, why we're talking about it. The question I would have sitting on the other side of the table is, so how do I do it, right? So how do I know and build that personal self, that purpose, that personal purpose, that mission? So talk to me a little bit about, when you're working with folks, we know the importance of it. How do you start to help folks really do their own exercises and really start building out and know thyself in that scenario?
I mean, this is going to sound, the irony is that for everything we've said, many people's minds might, I think, erroneously assume that we are pointing to the realm of kind of personal politics and turning yourself into a kind of candidate or a brand to be sold. Really what I'm talking about is the opposite, is the complete opposite of that, right? In trying to figure out who you are authentically and how that is communicated, unlike a politician, there is no brand without authenticity. There is no authenticity without vulnerability. Right. Vulnerability is the way in, which is why a lot of people struggle with this, because a lot of people being vulnerable is not a comfortable position to be in for a lot of people.
No, it's not.
And it's not a thing that is often asked of us in terms of how we project ourselves in a talent market, how we project ourselves in a market of ideas, or a leadership market, all the many different arenas that we're asked to compete in our professional lives. Vulnerability is often seen as a liability
Or a weakness.
Yeah, weakness. But I've often thought that showing up with all of your wounds is actually the best and easiest way to do it. And I'll tell you why. Number one, it is who you are, right? Think about how much energy it takes to build the suit of armor. Just take it off. The other thing that does is when you show up with your own vulnerability, you can elicit it from others, right? And you can build real relationships with people. You're like, hey, right, this is me. I don't know anything about this thing. I'm an idiot. Please tell me, right?
Yeah, humility goes a long way. Humility goes a long way. I think people feel more of that connection as opposed to putting up that armor and unapproachable. Yeah, humility. I agree. Humility goes a long way.
And I think that at base, showing up with vulnerability to think about who you are authentically actually takes a ton of guts, and everyone understands that and recognizes it. So while a lot of people think that they can project courage or excellence or whatever through whatever machinations, whatever artifice they produce, the courage, everyone can sense the courage it takes to show up and just be like, yeah, this is me.
I think it's probably worth calling out. And I bring this up because you've actually said it a couple times in some of the training that we've done here, which is there's another side of that coin of like, yes, like show up, be vulnerable. Like it's okay to acknowledge if you don't have answers, but there's also some confidence that comes along with that. Like, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out.
Right.
Or, hey, basically confidently asking folks like, hey, I don't know it, and that's okay. Maybe you do. Do you have it? Or if nobody does, then that's okay too. We're smart people. We're here to find answers, and we will do that. And I think that's maybe the flip side of that coin, that oftentimes people focus so much on I can't say that I don't know. It's
right.
Like, you can say you don't know because you're smart and you're going to then turn around and find the answer or work with people to do that. Right.
Yeah.
Am I off in that?
No, you nailed it. And so when that same person then does have the answer, people trust it.
Yeah.
Because it's not just an answer. It's a trusting, confident answer because they already showed you when they don't know it, they are courageous enough to let you know. Yeah, no, you nailed it. I mean, that's to me, there's a domino effect to that.
There is a domino effect. And, I think when we think about the people who we work with or people with whom we've had strong work relationships, mentors and colleagues, people who we would say have like good personal brands, or at least ones that we feel confident that we can define. A lot of the through line between all of that is being able to have a confident sense that you are seeing through to the actual person underneath.
Sure.
When they get in their car and drive home, you run into them getting coffee on the weekend, you're going to be running into the same John, right? Or you're going to be running into the same Josh. And there we have professional habits we have to wear, for courtesy. But the point being, we're not supposed to be these Willy Wonkas, walking around with our circus outfits on, going home.
Yep.
Empty, half-lit world. And I think that to go on to the question you asked, John, about, okay, right, we understand that authenticity is important. We get that being vulnerable is important. Maybe we're ready to start, but how do we actually get there? What does that actually mean? What are the steps? I think there are a few ways to do it, and I can walk through some of the different kinds of exercises that I've done with people. None of these are prescriptive, and they can all very easily be replaced with other different kinds of exercises to get there. What matters is the goal. Really, the first things I'll start to do with people are not about putting a logo down or writing a tagline. The first thing we do is stuff that I think would be legible to anybody in terms of just regular, good old personal development, right? So we'll usually sometimes I'll talk with people. We'll go through some psychometric evaluations. People do their Myers-Briggs or look at their Holland codes or.
We're going through the Enneagram right now with the team. So yeah.
And I'm sure you guys have thoughts about this too. All of the psychometric tools are useful, just like when you're at the county fair and you go to the fortune teller, right? What's useful about it isn't that it is like
right.
Reductive article of truth. What's useful is that it gives you a place to react.
That's right.
The fortune teller tells you, "Oh, I can see that you have big things in your future," and you're like, "You have no idea what you're talking about." And that might be the same when you do one of these psychometric tests, and that is good. That's a good thing to register. I have one that I do with people, which I just call dichotomies. Similar, it's just a dichotomy of different values, right? Different kinds of frameworks or perspectives that people can have to interpret the world. And I ask people to put themselves where they are on that scale. So for instance, on one side might be the promise of the future, and on the other side is the influence of the past. And the question is, how do you orient naturally? Not what do you aspire to, not in your job, what is required of you to think about,
right?
Out of work, on your own. Are you more thinking about, what the future holds, the promise of technology or progress? Are you more thinking about when you look at an article in the news or you're talking to somebody about an issue that's happening? Are you more thinking about the influence of the past and the way that what happened in the past is kind of set up to what you're dealing with now? Some people might find themselves right in the middle. Some people might feel very strongly about one side or the other. And we have a whole list of those. And you go through those, I think some of the other ones are like reality and mythology. That's a fun one.
They get you thinking, though. They get you thinking. I remember going through a couple of exercises with different teams, and it really gets you thinking. You're like, well, I'm kind of both, but am I really leaning more towards one than the other? And it actually is a little bit eye-opening of, I guess I do look more towards the future pieces as opposed to learning from the past. It kind of starts to paint a picture for you in a way maybe that you haven't thought before, but it's thought-provoking, which I like.
Yeah. And this is just an example, right? But the point of this exercise, the psychometric exercises, another thing I'll just have people do is just to free write. So I'll ask people to sit down and what I call an attribute map. It's really just a writing exercise. You tell people how do you orient naturally? Think about all the things that you enjoy doing in your life. And then what I want you to do is, write down the actual tasks and then begin to build concepts from that. So someone might write down like, going to yard sales, treasure hunting. They might write down, watching a lot of random YouTube videos. They might write down, I don't know, doing research on different products or something like that. Really mundane things that you'd probably be embarrassed to tell anybody in your job that you do. The point of that is that you begin to kind of build a pattern out of that and say, well, actually, when I think about it, the core motivators I have when I'm getting lost on YouTube or treasure hunting has to do with curiosity, right? Because I'm a really naturally curious person and I like learning things. Or maybe it has to do with an element of research, right? Maybe this is all part of a kind of research-oriented self that I have. I like the idea of amassing knowledge. I like the idea of dipping into different domains and pulling out useful information. And then what you have is a concept. You're like, okay, when I think about how I am naturally, I feel more comfortable in maybe more research-oriented capacities or more collaborative-oriented capacities or more creative-oriented capacities, so on and so forth. And when you have that language in place, you can begin to think about exactly sort of who you are on
Yeah.
an everyday basis.
Yeah, and Alex, I remember doing that exercise a little while back and kind of going through those pieces, and I started realizing I'm a builder, right? I'm not an operator, right? That was one of the distinctions. I like putting teams together. I like new organizational designs. I like a challenge of a new product or environment that I can start from scratch. I love gray. I love ambiguity, right? I like coloring it, right? I'm not an operator. I started realizing that though I had roles that were operational roles, and I realized, yeah, I did good at them, but it wasn't like jumping up in the morning on Monday, but I jumped up in the morning on Monday when I was building something or starting something. And so it was that kind of exercise that really started getting like, what is my personal brand? And really, once I started realizing that, when people say, what do you like doing? And it's always one of those, who are you in the company? I'm a builder. You can plop me into places and build, and I'm okay with gray. Like those things started coming out of that. So I don't know if that's an exercise that others would do. I think it'd be great.
How much of the personal brand is something that is acknowledging kind of the persona or characteristics that are already in play within you that you have habitually kind of played out in the world versus aspirational in nature and what you want to become?
That's a great question. Let me give my gut response, Alex, and then as definitely respond with a more thought-provoking answer, I'm sure, than mine. But my gut to that is it is a mixture of both. But I would say the majority of it is who you are. All right, the majority of it is who you are. I also think it's a potential part of where you're at in your life cycle too. I think, early on you're trying to figure that out. You're trying to really understand who I am, my purpose, my brand, and because you don't always know what you're good or not at because you haven't tried some things. I think as you go further in your career, it starts to get clarity and maybe more of really who you are and less of what you're aspiring to starts to happen. I think there's an aspiration there too, because I think everybody looks at their personal brand and who they are and say, there are things that I want to be better at. There are things that I want to be more known for but I just haven't had a chance to do it. So I think that percentage of who you are starts climbing as you get more into your career. That's how I view it, Alex. I don't know if that's a different lens that you've got on or thought to that. Good question.
No, I think that's well put, and that kind of defines it in this. That's basically the same answer I was thinking about, though from a different vantage point. I would say, let's take a step back, right? All of these things we're talking about in terms of your natural orientation, these are not skills. These aren't even necessarily behaviors, right? We're not talking about things that you've learned. We're not talking about the different competencies you might bring into the workplace, based on the job. And we're not even necessarily talking about, how well. It's not really evaluative about how well you are at being curious or so on and so forth. It's more about defining the things that come really naturally to you.
Gotcha.
And I think that people struggle when they feel like they need to construct or build a brand based on what they think to be a desirable persona in again, this a kind of professional marketplace. And the point is that I just think that way always leads to ruin, because like we said at the top, everyone will always see through it. So what's more important is actually just figuring out, like, who is the person of Josh, for instance. And I think, like, in any professional context, be it a new job or a new project or a new client, the question is always, what happens when we put a Josh in this new role? How does Josh show up?
Oh, that's a great call. Yeah.
But to begin to answer that question, we need to know what a Josh is first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well said, and it's a good direct, because you're right. It's not the skills components. It's who you are as a person, and I think the lead up of that to something that I know we're going to get to here, because it's really important to me and others that I've worked with, is your purpose. Then, right, your brand starts to create now that I know the authentic me, my brand. what is my mission and my purpose, both, in the organization that I'm working with and outside. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the right path, right, to have that kind of sequence, because that's when rubber hits the road, right? When you're able to sit there and say mission and purpose, and Alex, I know you'll go through this. When we're talking about your mission and purpose, you're also talking about what you have control over. There's a lot of things you do not have control over. You know who you are, you know your brand, and you build out now based on that. Here's my mission and my purpose. Based on that, you have control over that. And I think in a lot of cases, we start to realize more and more what we do not have control over. And I think this exercise gets you in a space where let's focus on what I can impact.
So what would that look like from within the professional setting, a mission and purpose within the workplace? Can you guys expand on that a little bit?
I credit John for this little tidbit of perfect clarity, right? There's a difference between a purpose and a mission, or a purpose statement and a mission statement, right? I think as John put it to me, this was, I don't know, sometime a couple of years ago. There are many missions. The mission can change on a daily basis. We can have 15 or 20 different missions based on, the requirements of our job and the vision of our company. Purpose is different. And really, when you think about purpose, there should be only, one or a handful of purposes that don't change, are ever present, and as John just said, are completely and only contingent on yourself and not on the whims or decisions of other people. So what does that mean? What do we mean when we say purpose versus mission? So let's say you sit down, you think about how you orient naturally. You go through whatever different kinds of assessments you want. I encourage you to talk to friends as well and get a sense of how they see you. That can, I think, be really valuable if you have strong friendships, and they'll they'll tell you to your face, as any good friend would do. You sit through those things and then you say, okay, this is who I am. I know that the way I orient is that I like to lead. I'm really interested in teamwork and building effective teams and being a collaborator. I know that the way that I orient is that winning is really important to me. I really like success and achievement and victory. And that's not a bad thing. That's just who I am. Those are things that are really naturally motivate me. You say, okay, so those are different attributes, right, that define who I am. But from a question of purpose, what we're going to do is take those attributes and we're going to turn them into values, right? We're going to turn them into social or moral goods. So if you take something like, leadership, and you say, what is the social or the moral good that underpins leadership, right? When you think about good leaders or good leadership, what is the value that is the benefit underneath that? And you'd say, well, maybe for leadership, the value has to do with courage, or it has to do with having vision. Or maybe the value has to do with, being generous and supportive, right? And there can be a whole bunch of them. You'd write those out, right? So you're taking an attribute and you're pulling out what the moral good would be out of that. Everyone has a different set of moral imperatives. I may be trained in philosophy. We won't have to go there. But the point being, you're pulling out the things that you understand to be beneficial. And then you're saying, okay, well, if I was to construct a professional purpose around these values, what would that look like? One of the ways that I do this, one of the exercises I do to help sort of crystallize this, is this little thing that I call it the C blank O, or the CXO. And it's a little Mad Libs thing. It's very simple. You're just basically asking somebody, if you were a C-suite officer in your company, in your organization, but instead of being in charge of a business tactic or a business division, you were in charge of a value in the company, what would that be, right? Would you be the chief courage officer? Would you be the chief resilience officer? Would you be the chief optimism officer? Would you be the chief transparency officer? So on and so forth, right? You know, a little cheesy, but the point is it begins to connect how your natural orientation can be beneficial and purposeful to the people around you and to the organizations that you're within, right?
Yeah. And Alex, that exercise, just to give you a example, so some of the mentees that I work with here at Method, you know, came up and did that exercise, and one of the things they came up with was, you know, chief collaboration officer, because that person was very much like when internal to our dynamic teams and with clients, I always feel like I help collaborate. I help bring the ideas together. I help move things forward. It was going into those values of, it's important for me that everybody has a voice. It's important for me that we're bringing in, you know, diversified thoughts and so on. And so that's what this person created as their C, right, was chief collaboration officer. And so once they had that, then they can say, okay, based on that, now what's my purpose? Now, what's my daily purpose? And again, the things you can control is your purpose, and you write that out, and it really helped them kind of get there. So collaboration was one. Another example in doing the exercise with somebody was they came back with, you know, I'm the chief optimistic officer, meaning, you know, when things are going awry, I'm going to bring in the glass half full. I'm going to make sure that no matter what happens, we stay calm and optimistic. No matter what happens, somebody messes up, we're going to stay optimistic. I'm going to take that negativity bias and throw it out. I am the chief optimistic officer. And to me, it really you start believing that more when you can get something simplistic like that to you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to just throw one out at you, I would say that, you know, chief glue officer, because everything that happens here, there's Josh's glue, right? The chief creative officer. Like, there's certain things that you can start saying, okay, this is who I am. So it's just examples.
For me, especially if you're new to some of these concepts, and I am by no means an expert in it, those sorts of things are always helpful. Whenever you're taking what really can be this monolith of a subject to navigate, say, hey, let's start here.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're not starting there, but let's at least, this is one of the things we're trying to tackle, and you simplify it down to something as minimalistic as that. And it's like, okay, that's a great starting point. I can work from there.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of gives me something to kind of, I'm still figuring out what all of this is, but that makes sense. I got some clarity there. Let's keep going.
Love it. I love it.
I think another way to put that, and I'll say this in the unbeeped version, or the beep version, I should say, is it's like, you know, like what do you give a funk about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just like, what do you give a funk about? Like at work, like, there are many things that we care about. And I think the potential pitfall, and I've seen this with people when working through this, is there are a whole bunch of values that we all support and believe to be imperatives, right? So it's not a question of, if I call myself the chief collaboration officer, does this mean that I don't care about empathy, or I don't care about intelligence, or I don't care about resilience, or, you know, whatever the other things are? It's not a zero-sum game, and it's not, you know, mutually exclusive. So the point being, let's put a list together. You can put a whole bunch together and just say to yourself, what is the thing that I feel like I am uniquely suited to be the steward of, the custodian, the protector of in my professional world, right? There might be a bunch of people who are really good at helping to maintain quality, right, in your work. But you might feel like there aren't a lot of people who are very good at asking the right questions and unpacking assumptions. So maybe you really want to be thinking a lot about bias, and maybe that is your goal, to be the chief, you know, unbiased officer. And when you are in meetings, when you are kicking off projects, when you're working with clients, you're really thinking to yourself, what are the biases that we're carrying in here? And in my role, what can I do to raise my hand and make sure that we are asking questions about these things?
Right.
or at least noting them. Same goes for things like quality or vision. Like, if it's my job to have if I'm thinking I'm deputizing myself to have the 50,000-foot vision, when I'm going into this meeting, I just want to make sure that we all have a sense of what that vision is up front. We can all wear these different hats, and we all often have to. So again, this is not a zero-sum thing. This is more about a sense of commitment of like, what's the thing that I'm going to be oriented to on a daily basis, that not only is a thing that is important, but again, is a thing that feels like it's a natural outcropping of who I am. It's like naturally tied into who I am. I'm not showing up and trying to fake it.
Alex, we just recorded a podcast recently on the subject of filter quality. And so we were talking with Jose, and one of the things that seems like the natural progression here is when we can establish what our personal brand is, what that looks like within the workplace, that helps us leverage our filter quality when things come up. Is that fair to say, like, hey, and the reason I'm asking this is because I could see if I've got a clear vision for my mission, my purpose, my personal brand within the company, and then something comes across the table for me, I can then say, hey, yes, I'm the right person for that, and I can respond, or I can look at it and be like, hey, I might not be the right person for that,
right,
and then I can respond accordingly in that direction. Is that a fair assessment of that? It's
a perfect assessment. Yeah, it's definitely the tie-in, and it's exactly what you said. And then the step after that is, if this is my purpose, does that event impact this purpose at all? And if it doesn't, again, now should I respond? Yeah, there's the right sequence to that, and really understanding who you are, what you're about, and your purpose really goes a long way into prioritizing your time. Mm-hmm. And that goes to the FQ. And Alex has been a part of a lot of those conversations. Alex, your take on that, but I think Josh, tied it in beautifully to have that understanding and be able to optimize.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. I think that I understand at many companies, smaller matrixed organizations, larger ones too, we're often asked to wear a lot of hats and to take on more and more responsibilities as part of our professional growth. And those can be important things and useful things, of course, especially in a sense of service. But it can also, we can become diluted in the not diluted, diluted in the process in terms of adulterated. We don't, we're spread thin. We can't really show up as our full selves in different functions and meetings because we're just, so overburdened with different responsibilities. And being able to take a step back and say, well, what exactly am I trying to do here? What is the goal? Obviously, sure, we want to impress people and we want to, get a raise or promotion, and those are fine things to do. But if that is the only purpose of all the things you're doing, I'm going to tell you, you're just going to drive yourself insane.
Oh yeah, yeah, because it's out of your control in a lot of cases.
Because not only is it out of your control, you will probably end up miserable too. Because you're just going to feel like, I'm doing all this stuff, I don't want to be doing it, I don't know why I'm doing it. You're just going to feel out of just a bare sense of obligation.
Yeah, and I think Alex, I was saying just on to that. I know that's a conversation you and I have had a lot, right? So how do you, the prioritization of it, that sequence, and if you can just simplify the equation of knowing who you are, what your overall brand is, and your purpose, leading to the focus and understanding of what you can control, optimizes time. I mean, we've had that conversation, and it's crucial. And I think, it goes to anybody at any point in their career. Somebody 30 years in their career needs a reminder of that. Somebody 10 years in their career, is just learning that early on. They're just picking it up. But it's the right sequence and equation.
I'm willing to bet both of you would say this has always been important. But I'm curious your thoughts on it. It feels like this is something that really might be a rather new concept as far as, from listening to just the generations that came before me, and how it's like, hey, you got a job, it pays you, you do your job, and if you don't, we'll find somebody else who will. And we're just not in an environment where that is the reality anymore, because the companies that we work for now, I think, have to be more mindful of this, just because like people have more options. They have the ability to jump ship and go somewhere else that is willing to consider these things. So I guess my question there is, we're talking about personal brand from the personal side. What is the role of the company in your minds as far as the importance that needs to be given to it today compared to maybe what it was, years ago?
It's an awesome question, and I have to applaud are the leaders that have come out in the last decade. They pretty much sat there and said, promotions, dollars, all these titles, all these things aren't what I would classify as the main success metrics anymore, right? There's this big shift now to the human development, and that's why I think this is a big conversation for us. And I would say absolutely now more than ever, really putting a lot more emphasis on it, because it was never. It's not a new concept or things that we're trying to do. Just the importance of it has come out, and the pieces that have really made that is we have companies that have to either maintain or create cultures in a very geographically diverse space where people aren't, the opportunity of face-to-face in a lot of cases. And then even those that are, the importance of success of work-life balance and knowing who the individuals are. Method does a great job of, bring your whole self to work, and the outside hobbies and hustles that people have here are amazing, the talents. And when you create an environment in a new world of business now that says that's good, that's a healthy space. I've worked in other environments where wasn't accepted. I know those other environments are making shifts also, and I would have never thought that would have been the case. But you're right; it is something that is a little newer in its time of the importance of it. I think well-being has become top of list for a lot of great companies now, and the ability to have these conversations and give tips and tricks and thoughts and equations and ideas and terms to it all go to that. So I think it is something that I would say in the last 4 years it's really exploded. COVID had many bad things. One thing it didn't have bad was it sped this up. And I think that's an important piece to grab.
Yeah, I would say, I would add to that because I do some consulting for HR, and when we think about workforce strategy and talent acquisition, I think there needs to be a sea change that's happening. And I think that if you're paying attention to what this conversation has been about, which is the importance of uncovering and building a self around an authentic best version of who anyone is or any employee is, it requires somebody in a talent acquisition space and leaders in general to think well beyond the resumes of the candidates that are coming in or the new hires that are coming in. People are not reducible to whatever smattering of experiences they may or may not have. They're also not reducible to the skills they have. How often is it that the mandate comes out that we need to replace Jeff and we need someone who's got proficiency in R and Python, period, as opposed to saying, we need a good person who is going to be as curious and thoughtful as Jeff was, or we need somebody whose personality and natural orientation is going to fit in and hopefully complement some of the other skill sets that we have here. So to do that, we need to think less about somebody's educational background and how they show up on paper, and we need to think more about who this actual person is and whether or not they're the right fit for us and we're the right fit for them as a company. You bring talent in, and I know that there are a lot of people in the older generation, a lot of senior leaders now, who have grown frustrated with the increased rate of turnover you're seeing in the talent market. People are not holding jobs as long. They're moving around.
More
Uh,
choices.
I think that, there are real natural reasons for that. One is there are more choices. Two, people feel more empowered to make changes. Three, it might not be a bad thing, right? People are looking
Right.
for a good match fit. They're looking for a good match fit between who they are and the company that they work at. And there are lots of great companies and lots of great people, and it just doesn't really work out. The roles don't work out. People don't feel like they have the support. People don't feel like whatever natural skills they bring or natural abilities they bring are being leveraged in the way that they want. They have different visions for themselves in terms of their growth in the company. So it means that companies have to do a lot better job thinking about the whole person in front of them and putting together a growth and development plan from the beginning that can point towards a direction of increased impact within the company. Not just, well, this is what our career ladder looks like. This is what the promotion cycle looks like. It has to be like, oh, okay, I see. Josh comes in and Josh is a super creative guy. And we need to think about obviously how he's delivering to clients, but what are ways that we can tap into his creativity in a meaningful way that can give him a sense of not just purpose, but also ownership over this in the company. I think that is what a lot of the good companies are thinking about right now.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like to add to that is the community environment. Understanding your own purpose, understanding your own brand is extremely important. We talked about it. Knowing the ones around you, what their brand is, what their purpose is probably just as important, right? It's support from the community I know this person's purpose is X. How can I help them with that? I know this person's brand is Y, and that's who they are. What's the best environment of a client or something for them? Like the community aspect of it, to me, goes a long way. And so it's, to me, we talk a lot about the self-help or the know thyself, but once that comes into play and you have a culture and a community that not only knows them, but knows the people around them, and then hopefully at some point build that relational intelligence to know the client aspect of it, because now you can truly trust and you can have influence and you can have these things. I think that's a pretty powerful thing. I mean, that's an environment that not just here, but many companies can absorb. Knowing who you are, there's a self-agency theory there. What's the best interest of me? But knowing your brand and your purpose is phenomenal. I think the more we get to the point of having the curiosity, Alex, to your point earlier, of knowing what Josh's purpose is, how can I help him with that? Or knowing what this person's brand is and helping them in the best situation to take advantage of that for the betterment of the good, or knowing, that's just not who they are. And then also understanding that how things are communicated starts to come into play. Well, this is who they are and how they are. So yeah, of course that would have been a difficult situation for them, right? So that community aspect for me is just as important. And I think as leaders, knowing thyself is great. Knowing the person to the left and right is probably just as important.
Very well said. I think I completely agree. I think leaders understand that a little bit. I think many leaders now get the fact that they need to step up. They're much more than managers. They have to not just provide a strategic and
Right.
attractive vision, but they also have to have a real sense of who the people are underneath them. Like a good manager on a football pitch, a good manager in a baseball dugout. You want to think about who you want to put in different situations,
Right.
and who matches up well. But to do that, you also really, to your point, John, you really need to help the people underneath you better define who they are, right? And it's not coming in with a mandate being like, all right, by Friday, everyone has to give me their purpose statements.
Right.
This kind of work happens in, again, like intimate one-on-one interactions, ones that can produce vulnerability, ones that can help reports and team members begin to piece together, thinking about what their natural orientation is, and thinking about what their real attributes are. And that takes patience, and it also takes the it takes the courage to hear things that you might not expect, right?
Well, and I'm hearing that too. And I think given the nature of COVID and kind of the forced remote nature of work, kind of the competitive job market that we've dealt with, it's very easy, I think, for us to see those things and say, well, I can get X over here, or I can get Y over here. And Alex, everything that you were just saying, like, I couldn't help but think of, hopefully that maybe gives us a little bit of grace for the people who are in positions where they now have to do all of these things that were never once expected of them from a leadership perspective, right? Hopefully that maybe gives some empathy for us to look at that and be like, hey, you are already in a position of a lot of stress to try and manage this enterprise. And now on top of that, we're saying, hey, for you to get me and other people like me, I need you to now take on this whole role that really, for the most part, wasn't, not that it didn't exist, but it wasn't as a priority as it is now. Like, hopefully that maybe makes us be like, hey, maybe I'm more concerned about, or less concerned about, do you have all the things in place versus do you have a culture that cares and is working towards this? At least for me, that's something I sometimes have to be reminded of.
Yeah. And Josh, the way you said it was great. And what comes to my mind is chicken and the egg, right? Previous, it was, manage the process, manage technology, here are the goals, set the visions. Oh, and the people. Flipping on its head, it becomes a manage the people, the well-being, the servant leadership, the development, all that. The rest of that stuff, because you did that, that's going to come. Mm-hmm. It's going to come. I mean, to where it was, I am a leader because I hierarchically are above you, and you will do X, right? People will run through a wall if they believe that you're helping them develop. They will run through a wall, and they won't leave the back door of the house.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. I think it has chicken and the egg. What came first, right? I think when we flip it and create that focus on our talent here at Method is these are our assets. Like, this is what we sell, the brains of what we sell, and it's focusing on them. Those other pieces, they're gonna come, and that's the piece to where it's like, and the moment you see that outcome better, even equal to or better than what it was previously because of that focus, it almost becomes a not additional focus, but a more prioritized focus.
I think one of the thoughts I was having around where we were talking about with that conversation, thinking about being a servant leader and how as a leader, your job is to kind of understand your people first. Okay. This goes back to what you were talking about in the beginning of the call, John, about your comfort with grayness and ambiguity. I think, just to speak globally, right? Projects and initiatives are growing much more complex. There are a lot more dependencies and intricacies to a lot of the things that we're doing. A lot more different kinds of skill sets that need to be integrated, right? We're not just making nails in a factory anymore. Right. So because of that, I think that there are a lot of people who have a lot of leaders who have the natural inclination to really want to have a vice grip on process and logistics and have things as formalized as they can. And that works well when you're making nails in a factory, but it doesn't necessarily work well when you have a really difficult project that has spun on a dime because there's a war in the Ukraine, or because there's some external factor that's changed it. So the point being, right, what you want to have is not necessarily, you don't need to have the strongest processes or the strongest formulations. What you need to have are the strongest teams. And you also have to have an appetite for a little bit of unhandsomeness. You have to have an appetite to watch the team turn or watch this new project come out, and maybe things are a little bit messy in the front. And that's okay. Messy is fine, so long as you are confident that your team is working hard to resolve the problem, and that they have a dynamic in place that you're confident that they're going to get to a solution.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and one of the pieces, Alex, that I wanted to cover, because it's the flip side of a lot of what we just went through and the kind of teams and the dynamic of the teams. Understanding your brand, understanding your purpose, the leaders understanding the brand and purpose of those around them. What's more important to that, or just as important, I should say, is knowing who you're not. Like knowing who you are, just that is not you, or that is not your purpose, or that is not your brand. I think that's extremely important. You know, there's a lot of times in my career where I wish I was X, or I would, you know, I'd hope I would, get to Y, but really getting comfortable in, look, I'm just not that. I'm just not that. And as a leader, how do you surround yourself potentially with your gaps, right? So knowing your gaps is an important piece, knowing your brand and surrounding yourself with 7 folks with exactly your brand, probably not the right call. Knowing that you're going to a new team, a new client, or whatever it is, and knowing a role maybe that is being asked of you, but being very clear and courageous of that's not me. You know, that's going to be a force fit. That's going to be a round peg in a square hole. It's just not. So the other piece I just wanted to convey, and I know we've talked about it in certain settings, is knowing who you're not is almost as important, right? It really is. And that's okay. Not everybody is a Swiss Army knife. And I don't think, I think it's okay that you're not. It takes every kind, right? So anyway, that's just a piece I always want to bring up when we're doing these, because knowing thyself is important, knowing your brand and what you're about is important, understanding how you take that to a purpose, and a purpose within your control to fit inside of not just your work environment, but in general outside too. But making sure you're okay with understanding what you're not, and be okay with that. That's not a bad thing. So just a thought to kind of throw out there as we're going through and kind of tying this out.
I think the thing to follow up with that, and you're absolutely right, John, and I want listeners to understand that this is not a proclamation in defense of stagnation, right?
Right.
I know John and I, we had a session recently where we were going through the Marshall Goldsmith book. And one of the things he makes very clear is the poison of making excuses for yourself and not allowing yourself to grow, because you're just saying, well, this is who I am and I couldn't possibly change, and it's not my job to change for other people. Again, so to relate what we've been saying, when you think about a personal brand, when you think about who a John is in a situation, who a Josh is, a new task comes up, you're put into a new position. You're asked to step up and take greater responsibilities, or you're asked to, handle a thing that you haven't done before. The question isn't, Josh couldn't possibly do this. The question is, okay, like Kim did a great job doing this. Kim did it this way. How is Josh going to step up and do it in his way, right? If the goal is to, produce an X or to build some kind of relationship, Josh doesn't have to do it the way that Kim did.
That's right.
You're right.
Josh should just do it the way that Josh does it, with the goal of getting to the same place. Just
to take a step back for folks new to this, you might be hearing this, when I first started having these conversations, I immediately went to, I've always been the creative person. I've always been the producer of stuff.
Right.
And if I were to have to move into a role where now I'm managing those types of people and maybe responsible for governing numbers and those, I think early on I was like, well, I just will never have one of those roles because I don't like numbers. Like that's just not, I don't like managing Excel sheets. I don't like doing all of those things. It's not that I can't do it.
Right.
And that was where I had to take that mental shift of, well, how do I bring those skills that I've developed over the years into a role where it's like, it's not a question of can you, can't you. It's just you've not had to do it. Maybe right now you haven't done it a lot, so you don't know if you really would enjoy it. But how do I take all of those things in and own this in my own way, so that I can then allow other people to do the tasks and do them well, like I've tried to do over the years. Yeah. So I guess I'm calling that out because I think immediately I start thinking of, well, I've never done this, so I can't do that. Well, that's a different thing than what you're talking about, Alex, correct?
Exactly. No, absolutely the case. It's not about, what I can and can't do. It's more about, what's the hypothesis that I have, and what's the experiment that we're going to be drawing around this, right? So I haven't done this before, which means that this is an experiment. We don't exactly know what the results are going to be. It doesn't mean that I can't do it or I shouldn't do it. By no means. It means let's have a hypothesis around how I'm going to show up, and let's see what happens, right? And having a natural curiosity around your own growth in that way, right? I think the second thing to add to around this question of personal branding and purpose is like, no one is static. People change, right? People change over their careers. People change as they learn new things about themselves. People change as things happen to you in and out of the workplace. And that's okay too. Those are good things to register also. There are many people I've seen, and this can often be a death sentence. You you choose a career aspiration when you're 18 and your hippocampus isn't fully formed, and then you feel so beholden to that, right? Be it the sunk cost fallacy or a sense of embarrassment, or really a sense of fear of changing your mind, and you're completely tied to this thing that really isn't you or isn't you anymore, and you can't just say to yourself, listen, maybe that's just not who I am, right? Maybe I really wanted to be a lawyer and I just am not into conflict. That's, even though I thought I was, that's just not me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that flexibility, the only way to have the okay with that flexibility is to continually know, right? Continually know your growth and what you've changed, and is your brand adjusted. And, I think purpose continues to adjust too. But the piece that I would just challenge everybody with is purpose is a daily thing. And I have a purpose statement in my head that I say every day. And I say it because, one, it's a reminder. Two, throughout the day, things happen, and I go back to that all the time. And the only way that stays muscle memory is that I say it every day. And they are things that I control. And the piece, regardless, as your career kind of goes on, and you're always make sure you're being self-reflective here, the ability to be able to maintain a daily purpose, it's huge and it's important. And I think, to Alex, to your point, that could adjust over time. Mine has adjusted over time because of different things that I have control over, different things that are important to me, and knowing my growth over that period of time. And folks that I work with, I remember this one lady I've been working with for 5 years. We helped build kind of that purpose early on. She came back a year ago and said, I've made an add to that purpose. And it was genius because she didn't just let it sit and not, continue to know that you can grow. She added to it, and it was perfect because it was something around positively impact people, right? It was like, I'm realizing the opportunities I have are greater now because of where my career is and my scope of social network. I added this because I believe I have control over it, and it's something that I can kind of check off each day, and so I added it. And I think that's great. And I think that's, to me, these are living and breathing things about you. To your point, Alex, it's not one and done. When you're 18, I deal with college students all the time, like, I'm supposed to know what I'm going to do. I say, I'm 50. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. It's okay. It's absolutely okay.
What you said really reminds me that I think there's an important nuance to add to conversations around growth, right? We like to talk about growth, professional growth. Growing is great, and I think the assumption made is that growing means is an additive process.
Right.
You add more here, you add more there. Growing is not an additive process. Growing is a process of clarification, right? Of clarification to a more evolved form.
Could be an audible.
Sometimes growth means like, you learn something and you're like, oh, no, actually, this isn't me. This isn't the thing I want to be doing. Mm-hmm. This isn't a thing I need to be taking on for myself. I need to be doing this other thing and going in this other direction. So just important for people to remember that when we're thinking about growth and we're thinking about kind of who we are as a person and defining ourselves, it's not this kind of, late capitalist metric of adding productivity and adding human capital, as much as it is just a process of clarification and finding, there's this William Stafford poem that I really love called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. I think about this poem a lot because there's a stanza at the end, which is, it's important for awake people to be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. And then like the signals we give, yes, no, or maybe, should be clear, the darkness around us deep. The point being, awake people should be awake. If you are awake, if you aren't, open your eyes. Think about where you are in the course of your career and life. Take full stock and honest stock of who you are, who you want to be, how you can show up as the best version of yourself. And I just encourage people on a daily or weekly, monthly basis, when you're in your career, to just be reminding yourself, like, what is the through line? It's very easy for us to get so bogged down in the urgent things and not the important things. And I think that's the benefit of having these kinds of conversations, to pull people out of that and get them to shore and say, do you remember what the line is that you drew? Does that make sense? Do you want to draw a new line? Do you see the direction you're going in?
I love it. I don't think there's a better way to end it. I think what you just went through, Alex, was perfect. I think it's great feedback and a lot for folks to think about. We've got a lot more coming in the series, and I'm excited about that. So, Alex, I appreciate it, brother. Thank you for sharing that. Josh, any last thoughts going through? I as he was saying that, I'm like, I can't top that. So that is exactly how I'd love to.
I don't have any poetry to say.
That's all right.
In my back pocket right now.
That's okay. That's why we bring them along. That's why I hang out with them. It makes me smarter. So, no, it's great. I appreciate it, Alex. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll see you again.
Thank you for listening to my pantomime and watching my soft shoe. It was a real pleasure. Thank you both for having me. And I look forward to having some future conversations with you both.
Absolutely, brother.